A Tyson's food processing plant now in Indiana, we've learned today, is set to close next year. This is all part of an effort there to cut costs.
Facility opens to boost Tyson Foods' automation and robotics efforts in food production. The Tyson Manufacturing Automation Center officially opened in downtown Springdale today.
Tyson Foods has just sent shockwaves through the United States by announcing the closure of multiple plants, leaving thousands of workers unemployed. The reason, the trade war launched by Trump. This is being seen as one of the most unprecedented blows to the American food processing industry in years and likely only the beginning. Slogans like America First, Bring Jobs Back, and Protect the Heartland now sound deeply ironic. In 2025, people in small towns across Arkansas, Missouri, and Iowa have felt the cost firsthand. Idle plants, empty neighborhoods, and vanished paychecks. All in the name of a policy labeled optimization. At the center of this storm stands Tyson Foods, the largest meat processing corporation in the United States. A brand once proud of its Made in America stamp is now shuttering plants one after another, pulling out of communities and leaving countless families struggling to survive. None of this was part of the original promises. Yet today, it is the harsh reality. Let's begin with the hard numbers. In just 2 years, Tyson Foods has closed more than 10 meat processing plants, resulting in over 5,000 workers losing their jobs across the country. In Perry, Iowa, as many as 1,300 families woke up one morning to a cold email. The plant was shutting down effective immediately. Lifelong pork workers were left with little more than a severance package and a link to an online training website. No warning, no transition plan. In Nowell, Missouri, the entire town revolved around a Tyson poultry facility. Overnight, 1,500 people lost their jobs in a community of only 2,000 residents. It was as if the town's very heart had been ripped out, and this tragedy is only the opening act. Donald Trump once insisted that tariffs would force corporations like Tyson to open more facilities in the United States. This past spring, standing in a Pennsylvania steel plant, he even declared, the higher the tariff, the stronger the incentive for companies to reinvest in America. But reality has played out in the opposite direction. In 2025, Trump rolled out another tariff package, 10% on all imports, steel tariffs doubled to 50%, plus duties on food products, farm equipment, and packaging from Europe, China, and Mexico. The result was not new plants opening, but soaring costs for raw materials and production across the board. For a company dependent on cheap feed, steel, transportation, and packaging like Tyson, profit margins were squeezed to the breaking point. Instead of pouring more money into building in the U.S., Tyson's leadership did the opposite, shuttering unprofitable facilities, shifting capacity to cheaper locations, and slashing costs at all costs. The jobs Trump promised to repatriate never returned. They vanished, leaving a gaping hole in the lives of thousands of families. And every time a factory gate shuts, another small community falls into hardship. The so-called protective shield never safeguarded workers at all. It only padded corporate bottom lines. In Dexter, Missouri, when Tyson decided to close its poultry processing plant, 683 workers were immediately thrown into unemployment in a community of barely 8,000 residents. City Administrator David Wyman admitted that the shock paralyzed the town overnight. He put it bluntly, "We lost people, we lost revenue, and we lost hope." The ripple effects appeared instantly. Grain farmers lost their biggest customer. Contract chicken growers tied to Tyson were abruptly cut off. 2 family-run restaurants had to shut down, and a long-standing hardware store locked its doors within months. Schools were forced to slash extracurricular activities as property tax revenues collapsed. And if this scenario were replicated across Indiana, Kansas, Pennsylvania, or Arkansas, places once promised they would be revitalized, the picture becomes clear. The very communities that place the most faith are the ones being hit the hardest. When Tyson pulls out, it's not just the workers who lose their jobs. The entire local economy goes into decline. Businesses that relied on Tyson's payroll shrink, Houses sit unsold and grocery stores reduce their hours or close altogether. Workers who once believed in the promises are left with empty factories and a forest of for sale signs planted on front lawns. In Perry, Iowa, the closure of Tyson's pork processing plant was not just an economic shock, but a full-blown community crisis. Nearly 60% of the workforce consisted of immigrants and refugees from Sudan, Eritrea, and Central America. They had bought homes, paid taxes, sent their children to school, and believed they were living the American dream. In an instant, that dream was shattered. Tyson's exit wiped out more than 20% of Perry's total income. Within weeks, the local grocery store reported sales cut in half, while school lunch programs scrambled to source cheap protein. Churches and food banks strained to care for hundreds of newly unemployed families. Mayor Dirk Kavanaugh lamented bitterly. "They told us the plant was no longer efficient." But what does that mean to the families who worked tirelessly every day? No response ever came from Tyson's headquarters. The stories of Perry, of Dexter, and of countless other towns reflect a bitter truth. When Tyson shutters a plant, it's not just the workers who lose their livelihood. The entire town loses its economic backbone. Tax revenues collapse, stores go empty, schools cut back. All that remains are communities left behind, standing amid the wreckage of promises that were never kept. This tariff policy has not created more jobs for Americans. Donald Trump's team once claimed it would shield domestic industry, but by 2025, the truth has become clear. Tariffs protect only corporate profits, while workers in small towns are pushed deeper into the harsh currents of global competition. When steel tariffs were raised from 25% to 50%, Tyson's leadership warned that everything from the refrigerator in the kitchen to the butcher's knife on the factory floor would soar in price. Trucking companies moving Tyson's products faced sharply higher costs for fuel and equipment. Feed prices climbed as aluminum tariffs drove up storage and grain transport costs. The entire supply chain was squeezed. Tyson's profits eroded, and that pressure was passed directly onto the backs of workers. Trump's argument sounded simple: make imports more expensive to force companies to bring production back home. But the way multinational corporations like Tyson operate is entirely different. As domestic costs rose, they did not open new plants. They shut old ones. They did not hire more workers. They laid them off. And when raw material costs spun out of control, Tyson cut back by closing plants in small towns and shifting capacity to cheaper locations, whether in another state or another country. None of this was about patriotism. It was all about profit. The ultimate burden still fell on American workers. While thousands of Tyson families struggled to cover rent and put food on the table, CEO Donnie King took home a compensation package worth $12 million in 2024. Nearly 300 times the average income of a Tyson worker. At the same time, Tyson continued to collect hundreds of millions of dollars in direct federal support from USDA programs, counting supply chain subsidies and disaster relief. The corporation pocketed more than $3 billion in less than 2 years, even as it shuttered plants and laid off thousands of employees. And Tyson kept playing politics. In 2025 alone, the company spent more than $2 million lobbying lawmakers in Washington, targeting the USDA, OSHA, and the Department of Commerce. Their objectives: loosening workplace safety rules, rolling back environmental requirements, and protecting profits against the tariff shock. While workers in Perry or Null stood stranded outside locked factory gates, uncertain where next week's pay would come from, Tyson's lobbyists sat in conference rooms in the Capitol negotiating on behalf of shareholders. For the communities left behind, those closed-door deals brought no hope at all. The fallout from Tyson's closures does not end with the workers inside the plants. Hundreds of small-scale contract farmers have also been thrown into crisis, losing their buyers for chickens, hogs, and cattle. In Missouri, many independent poultry farmers woke up to find their contracts torn up with barns full of birds they could no longer sell. Sean Hinkle, a farmer who borrowed millions of dollars to build chicken houses to Tyson specifications, now faces bankruptcy. Tyson told us to expand. Then they turned their backs, he said bitterly. The threat of losing his family farm hangs over Hinkle, and he is not alone. A 2025 investigation by the Missouri Independent revealed that dozens of farms in Missouri and Arkansas risk foreclosure after Tyson's withdrawal. Some farmers were forced to sell livestock at rock-bottom prices, while others had no choice but to cow all entire flocks. Banks that had once eagerly provided loans backed by Tyson's contracts now see those same agreements as major risks. Generations of farm families in regions Trump once promised to revive are now watching their dreams collapse, all because a corporate partner pulled out in the name of optimizing operations. And the impact does not stop at the farm gate. Consumers are paying the price as well. According to a 2025 Federal Reserve report, tariffs on steel, aluminum, and imported agricultural products pushed food production cost up 6.8% year over year. The result has been higher prices for supermarket chicken, for portions in school lunch programs, and even for meals at local restaurants. Schools in Kansas report they have been forced to cut back on meat portions in student lunches. Cafeteria managers in Arkansas say they must either switch to cheaper protein substitutes or raise meal prices, pushing the burden onto parents already struggling with inflation. Small, rural grocery stores are no better off. In No, Missouri, the town's only supermarket reported chicken sales down 40% since the Tyson plant closed. In Perry, Iowa, a grocery store that once sourced pork from Tyson now has to bring in supply from out of state at higher costs. With the supply chain fractured, small businesses are left with no choice but to raise prices or face bankruptcy. And yet, while ordinary people are paying the price, tariff supporters boast that the steel industry is a success story. It is true that a handful of new steel plants have opened in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and some workers have returned to their jobs, but those gains are fragile. U.S. steel prices are now up to 35% higher than the global average, making cars, appliances, and even Tyson's processed foods less competitive in international markets. Manufacturers now face two choices: raise prices and lose customers, or cut costs, usually by laying off workers. Tyson chose the latter. Industry groups, including the National Association of Manufacturers, have repeatedly urged the White House to ease tariffs in order to stabilize prices. But Trump has stood firm, citing the need to protect the steel and aluminum industries for reasons of national security. What he does not acknowledge is that towns dependent on manufacturing can no longer afford the very materials they rely on. The result is that a handful of large steel corporations profit, while thousands of supporting businesses, including Tyson, and tens of thousands of workers suffer. From Perry, Iowa, to Knoll and Dexter in Missouri, to Corydon, Indiana, and North Little Rock, Arkansas, the pattern repeats. Tariffs drive costs up, profits are eroded, and Tyson's board of directors chooses to close plants and cut jobs to protect shareholders. These are not isolated incidents. This is a systematic withdrawal from the industrial heartland of America, precisely in the very places where Trump once won votes by promising to revive the economy. For workers, farmers, and town leaders, the prevailing feeling is one of betrayal. Federal War Act legislation requires companies to give 60 days' notice before closing a plant. Yet, Tyson has repeatedly sidestepped the law. In Perry, many workers only learned the news through rumors. In Knoll, the official notice came right before the final workdate with no relocation plan in place. Unions accuse the company of exploiting legal loopholes to avoid responsibility, calling it a blatant betrayal. No severance package is enough to fill the void. Workers are forced to leave their hometowns to seek jobs in distant cities or remain in communities where suitable employment no longer exists. Some head to Des Moines or Kansas City to apply for warehouse work. Others rely on food banks and churches just to get by. For many immigrants and refugees, Tyson had once been their only anchor. Its disappearance brought an immediate economic shock. In Dexter, the Tyson plant once contributed nearly 25% of the local economy. When it disappeared, restaurant revenues dropped by 50% overnight. Car dealerships lost contracts. Churches saw soaring demand for assistance, and a petrol station shut down when Tyson trucks stopped coming through. In Perry, the school budget collapsed, leading to teacher layoffs, canceled after-school programs, and higher lunch fees. Roads went unrepaired, and plans to revitalize the town center were shelved. While rural America struggles with collapse, Tyson announced new investments in Thailand, China, and the Netherlands, where labor is cheaper and export taxes are lower. They call it a global strategy, but to American workers it feels like nothing short of betrayal. Trump once promised that tariffs would reverse globalization. In reality, corporations like Tyson are accelerating it. Even within the United States, Tyson has funneled investment into plants in southern states where unions are weak, wages are low, and safety standards are lax while shuttering long-standing facilities in the Midwest. Management calls this optimization. For workers, it is simply another way of saying they have been abandoned. Trump still takes the stage in Ohio and Pennsylvania, insisting that tariffs will bring factories back. Yet, since 2023, Tyson has closed 8 facilities and laid off more than 5,000 people without opening a single new plant. Tariffs have not built anything. They have only destroyed what already existed. Economists have long warned of this. Tariffs drive prices up, weaken competitiveness, and ultimately cost jobs. By the end of 2025, Tyson's share price had even rebounded as investors applauded the company's belt-tightening. On Wall Street and in corporate boardrooms, Tyson is hailed as a model of restructuring success. But in small towns across America, it is a bitter lesson in the gap between political promises and economic reality. Trump's tariff strategy has never been rooted in long-term planning. It resembles more of a bargaining tactic. He announces sky-high tariffs, waits for corporate pushback, then quietly scales them back or delays them indefinitely. Economists have dubbed this the taco strategy. Threaten, announce, compromise, then pivot. Yet this cycle of repetition has only fueled instability, discouraging corporations from making major investments. Amid volatile raw material prices and erratic trade policy, Tyson's leadership has chosen to prioritize shareholders, cutting domestic costs and avoiding long-term commitments. The trend extends beyond Tyson. Automakers have delayed factory expansions. Semiconductor giants have paused plans for new chip plants. In the food industry, Tyson and many others are consolidating operations, closing underperforming sites, and looking abroad for growth. Trump once claimed that tariffs would revive American industry. In reality, they only made an already fragile supply chain even more vulnerable. By 2025, the main product of tariffs has been instability. The impact of Tyson's withdrawal goes far beyond a single plant. In Kansas, the cost of school meals skyrocketed once Tyson chicken disappeared. Schools were forced to pay more than 20% extra for smaller portions, and some even cut meat entirely. This is not economic protection. It is collective abandonment. Tyson's role in this story has only deepened the sense of despair. The company has blamed tariffs while still paying its executives millions, expanding operations abroad, and hiring lobbying teams in Washington to safeguard its interest. On one hand, it takes subsidies from public funds. On the other, it lays off workers. It calls closures network optimization, but in truth, it shifts the entire burden onto farmers and small-town workers. And this is not the end. By mid-2025, Tyson was reviewing the viability of its facilities in Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Texas. Analysts warned that if costs continue to climb and demand weakens, more plants will shut down. Trump's latest tariff threats on imported European meat could trigger retaliatory measures, further shrinking Tyson's export markets. If that happens, thousands more American jobs will once again be at risk. Other industries are watching closely. The lesson is clear. Protectionist policies dressed up in slogans often ignore market realities, and the final cost always falls on the most vulnerable. Families who once believed in the promise of America First are now left asking, when will it finally be their turn to be truly protected? Thank you for watching. Please hit like and subscribe to support because your engagement is the greatest motivation. Meanwhile, a new White House order has just doubled tariffs on steel and aluminum, sending markets into turmoil once again as Trump escalates his trade war. The new economic order he seeks to build is taking shape, but it comes with unpredictable losses for workers.